A $2.1 million missile flew to empty water. The Aegis system never fired. Electronic warfare never engaged. No SM-6 interceptor ever left its launch cell. A 1985 doctrine, worth exactly $0, moved a destroyer into a hole in Iran's radar network. When the Khorramshahr 4 arrived at the calculated impact point, the ship it was targeting was 14 nautical miles away. 14 nautical miles. That number is not a near miss. It is not a close call. It is the difference between a weapon system and an expensive piece of metal falling into the Strait of Hormuz. The number that makes it interesting is not 14. It is 0. The solution, a Cold War emissions control tactic printed in a doctrine manual before most of the engineers who built the Khorramshahr 4 were born, cost the United States Navy exactly $0 to execute. $2,100,000 against 0. That is what this video is about. Every analysis of Iran's naval threat in the Persian Gulf focuses on the missile, the range, the speed, the terminal maneuvering profile. That is the wrong frame. The missile is the last mile of a kill chain that runs for 200 nautical miles. Kill chains have seams. The Navy found the seam. How they found it, what they did with it, and why Iran's engineers never modeled it. That is the story we are working through today. The ship first. USS Truxtun. Hull number DDG-103. Arleigh Burke class destroyer. Flight 2, A variant. Commissioned September 25th, 2009, at Bath Iron Works in Bath, Maine. She is 509 feet long. She displaces 9,200 tons fully loaded. She carries 96 Mark 41 vertical launch cells loaded with Standard Missile 6 interceptors, Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, and ASROC anti-submarine weapons. Her AN/SPY-1D phased array radar can track more than 100 airborne targets simultaneously. In recent months, CENTCOM has been quietly upgrading forward-deployed destroyers with elements of the AN/SPY-6 air and missile defense radar, a system with roughly 3 times the sensitivity of the legacy SPY-1D it supplements. Truxtun was among the first ships in the Gulf to receive that integration package. On paper, she is one of the most capable surface combatants anywhere in the world. Iran knew every dimension of her. That is the first reality of operating a warship in the Persian Gulf in 2026. The Strait of Hormuz is not an ocean theater. It is a corridor 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest navigable point, near the Musandam Peninsula on the Omani side and the Keshem Island complex on the Iranian side. 2 shipping lanes run through that corridor, one inbound, one outbound, in continuous motion around the clock. 14 tankers transit on an average day, sometimes 20, each broadcasting its identity, position, course, and speed via automatic identification system, transponders visible to any receiver with a maritime data subscription. Warships do not run AIS in hostile environments, but they cannot hide from everything. Iran maintains fixed radar installations on both shores of the strait. They operate patrol craft along the Iranian coastline on continuous rotation. Their intelligence services maintain observer networks in Bandar Abbas, the primary Iranian port on the eastern strait, and in the smaller ports of Manab, Jask, and Keshem. Iranian signals intelligence ships operate in the Gulf of Oman, positioned to track American naval movements approaching from the Arabian Sea. Commercial satellite imaging, available to any government with a subscription to Planet Labs, Maxar, or China's Jilin-1 constellation, provides revisit cycles as short as 30 minutes over the Persian Gulf. When USS Truxtun departed naval support activity Bahrain and began her transit toward the Strait of Hormuz in recent weeks, Iranian signals intelligence had her tagged before she cleared the harbor approach. They watched her transit. They updated her position in their targeting database. They ran the firing solution. Iranian state media published the characterization without apparent irony. a gift wrapped for the Khorramshahr 4. On paper, they were not wrong. Truxtun's radar horizon sits at roughly 30 nautical miles in surface search mode. The Khorramshahr 4 fires from 200 nautical miles out. That gap, 170 nautical miles of distance, is what Iran calls a sanctuary. Fire from inside it, and by the time Truxtun detects an inbound missile, she has under 4 minutes to respond. Iran had run that calculation extensively. They liked the math. They were solving the wrong equation. To understand what the Navy did, you need to understand exactly how the Khorramshahr 4 kills. Not just the terminal phase, the whole kill chain. The Khorramshahr series is Iran's most significant indigenous anti-ship strike program. Iranian engineers were explicit about the design intent from the beginning, to hold American carrier strike groups at risk from inside Iranian territory, at ranges where even the SM-3 interceptor, designed for mid-course ballistic intercept, would struggle against a maneuvering terminal phase. The fourth development iteration, the Khorramshahr 4, incorporates a redesigned solid-fuel motor delivering Mach 5 terminal velocity, a maneuvering re-entry vehicle for terminal evasion, and most critically, a redesigned mid-course guidance architecture. That last element is what makes it genuinely dangerous, and it is also what makes it vulnerable. The kill chain runs like this. Iran's domestically produced Ghadir over-the-horizon radar network, operational since 2014, multiple installations along the Iranian coast, detects an American warship at ranges of up to 300 nautical miles. Ghadir uses high-frequency skywave propagation. The radar signal transmits upward, bounces off the ionosphere at an angle determined by operating frequency, and returns to Earth at a distance determined by the propagation geometry. This allows detection of surface contacts far beyond the line-of-sight horizon of conventional radar. The system can track multiple contacts simultaneously and maintain targeting quality data on vessels moving at standard warship speeds. The Ghadir returns feed into a targeting computation center that calculates the initial firing solution. Launch authority is requested through the IRGC Navy command chain. Since 2019, a strike on a foreign warship requires approval at a senior command level. Authorization is granted. The missile launches from a mobile transporter erector launcher positioned deep inside Iranian territory, beyond the reach of any shipborne weapon the targeted vessel carries. The missile enters a semi-ballistic arc. At cruise altitude, it is flying the trajectory calculated at launch, based on Ghadir's last confirmed radar return on the target. Then, at approximately 90 seconds before projected impact, when the missile has descended to mid-course altitude and its guidance system is active, Ghadir transmits an updated targeting packet. This packet contains the target's current position, derived from a fresh radar return taken seconds before transmission. The missile's guidance computer ingests the update, calculates the difference between the original trajectory and the target's new position, and executes a course correction. That correction transforms the Khorramshahr 4 from a ballistic weapon into a precision weapon. Remove the mid-course update, and the missile flies the trajectory calculated at launch. At Truxtun's standard cruising speed of 20 knots, that is 7.5 feet of movement every second. Over 90 seconds of uncorrected flight, that is 675 feet. Over 3 minutes, roughly a quarter mile. But the targeting solution is not 3 minutes old. It is whatever age the last confirmed Ghadir return was when the missile was fired. If the last confirmed Ghadir return on Truxtun was obtained 11 days before the missile launched, the uncorrected trajectory flies to her position 11 days ago. That is 14 nautical miles. Iran built the most capable anti-ship missile in their inventory around a targeting architecture with a single catastrophic failure mode. Subscribe to Navy Strikeforce. In our video on the A-10 Warthog over the Strait, we showed you what happens when the right tool is not the newest one. This is the same equation, applied to doctrine instead of hardware. The United States Navy had known about this failure mode for at least 6 years before Truxtun's deployment. I spent considerable time working through declassified Cold War-era naval doctrine and the open-source analytical literature on Iranian over-the-horizon radar, and one pattern kept emerging. A pattern that does not appear in most public analysis of Iranian naval capability because it requires understanding two separate technical domains simultaneously: ionospheric radar physics and Cold War anti-ship targeting doctrine. The documents that connect them are not classified. They are just old enough that most current analysts stopped reading them. The physics first. The Ghadir radar installations on the Iranian coast transmit signals upward at a specific elevation angle. The signal propagates through the ionosphere and returns to Earth at a distance determined by the transmission frequency and the ionospheric conditions at the time of transmission. The geometry of that propagation creates a coverage footprint, the area where the returned signal is strong enough to detect and track surface contacts. Now, introduce an elevated terrain feature along the Iranian side of the strait. Lyrak Island sits at approximately 26.8 degrees north, 56.35 degrees east. It is located at the eastern entrance to the Strait of Hormuz, roughly 35 kilometers southwest of Bandar Abbas. Its highest point is approximately 397 meters above sea level. The island is volcanic in origin, formed from late Cretaceous ophiolitic rock, dense and structurally solid. It is largely uninhabited. It appears on navigation charts primarily as a hazard to shipping, not as a strategic terrain feature. For Ghadir radar installations on the Iranian mainland, the geometry of skywave propagation and the physical elevation of Lyrak Island create a shadow zone, an area where the combination of bounce angle and terrain blocks effective surface illumination. The shadow extends to the southwest of the island, toward the strait's western approaches and the patrol routes American destroyers use when operating in the Eastern Gulf. Under standard ionospheric conditions, it provides an area of degraded or absent Ghadir coverage, extending roughly 12 to 18 nautical miles from the island's southwest face. 12 to 18 nautical miles. Not large enough to conceal a fleet. Exactly large enough to conceal one destroyer, maintaining a deliberate patrol position while executing a specific operational task. The tactic that exploits this shadow is called EMCON Charlie. Emissions control, Charlie level, the highest tier of electromagnetic discipline in United States Navy doctrine. A ship running EMCON Charlie transmits nothing detectable by adversary signals intelligence. No active radar pulses. No standard radio communications. No electronic emissions above the threshold that would register in IRGC collection systems. The ship becomes, from an electronic standpoint, a hole in the ocean. What the ship retains, the ability to receive encrypted fleet transmissions, GPS navigation, which is passive receiving only, passive sonar listening, and the ability to activate its SPY-1D radar in an extremely short burst mode, a single antenna rotation, electronically processed, then immediately off, to update the tactical picture without providing a sustained signal for Ghadir to process into a targeting quality track. The burst duration is shorter than the dwell time required for Ghadir to compute stable targeting data. The constraint is real. Running EMCON. Charlie inside a threat environment means reduced situational awareness in one axis to neutralize a higher priority threat in another. For a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, drone threats, fast boat swarms, the possibility of unannounced surface attacks. Operating without continuous active radar places, genuine stress on the crew's ability to maintain a complete tactical picture. The Combat Information Center is navigating a hostile strait, coordinating with fleet elements, responding to emergent contacts, and doing all of it with severely restricted electromagnetic output. The obstacle Truxtun's commanding officer and crew faced was not conceptual, it was human. For 11 days, the CIC team ran a watch posture that had not been executed in a real-world forward deployment in years. EMCON protocols that exist in training manuals were being maintained live, against an adversary that was actively searching for the ship. One detail from that period: other destroyers in the Gulf had to compensate for Truxtun's absence from the shared radar picture, maintaining tighter surveillance sectors, filing more frequent encrypted position updates, absorbing the coordination overhead that Truxtun's emissions silence created. The decision to hold EMCON Charlie for 11 days required not just a confident commanding officer, but a carrier strike group commander, willing to accept the operational friction of a missing radar node in his electronic order of battle. They held it. And on day 3 of Truxtun's disappearance from Ghadir tracking, the first signal that something unusual was happening reached IRGC intelligence analysts. Iranian operators noted the loss of contact in the standard surveillance zone. Initial assessment: the contact had moved outside the coverage area, or the radar was experiencing a gap from ionospheric disturbance. Standard procedure: wait for the contact to reappear, or task a secondary surveillance asset. Day 5. The secondary surveillance asset, a vessel operating in the strait under commercial cover, located a contact consistent with Truxtun's dimensions in the shadow zone southwest of Larak Island. No active radar emissions, no radio transmissions, no electronic signature matching the Arleigh Burke profile in the IRGC targeting database. Day 7. Iranian intelligence analysts escalated to senior IRGC Navy Command with an assessment. The American destroyer appeared to have deliberately entered the Ghadir shadow zone and was maintaining emissions silence consistent with EMCON Charlie doctrine. The assessment noted the historical precedent for this tactic. It also noted that the Khorramshahr 4's targeting architecture had not been specifically modeled against this scenario. What is most surprising about this situation is not the tactical outcome. It is the gap between what Iran's engineers built and what Iran's doctrine office told them to build for. The Khorramshahr 4 program went through at least 4 development iterations and billions of rials in investment. Its guidance architecture was state-of-the-art for the threat model it was given. That threat model assumed an Arleigh Burke operating under standard emission protocols. Because for the past decade, American destroyers in the Persian Gulf had done exactly that. Active radar, standard communications, electronic signatures fully visible to Ghadir. The engineers optimized for the environment they were given. Nobody handed them a scenario where the target simply stops emitting. Drop equation in the comments if this changes how you think about what wins naval confrontations in 2026. Day 9. IRGC commanders placed Truxtun's shadow zone position under elevated observation, waiting for an emission. Their calculation was logical. No commanding officer holds EMCON Charlie indefinitely in a live threat environment. Operational requirements would eventually force a transmission. When she emitted, they would update the targeting solution and finalize the firing authorization. She did not emit. The tactical picture in the Gulf was building pressure in a different direction. Day 11. The authorization chain for a Khorramshahr 4 strike was activated. Senior IRGC Navy commanders had calculated that even without a current Ghadir return, the targeting solution based on Truxtun's position via the surveillance vessel was accurate enough for a first strike attempt. The terminal seeker head, they assessed, would acquire the target if the initial trajectory brought the missile within the seeker's activation cone. What they were not accounting for is what Truxtun had been doing for 11 days inside that shadow zone. She was not stationary. She was not anchored to the initial position the surveillance vessel had confirmed. She had been maneuvering within a calculated patrol pattern designed specifically to maximize the positional discrepancy between any externally observed location and her actual position at the moment a missile seeker activated. Running EMCON Charlie while receiving encrypted fleet transmissions, Truxtun knew the Ghadir coverage geometry. She knew the dimensions of the shadow zone she was operating in. She was moving within it with intent. Here is what that combination does to the Khorramshahr 4's kill chain. The missile launches. It flies its initial ballistic arc. 90 seconds before projected impact, Ghadir attempts to transmit the mid-course update. But Ghadir does not have a current return on Truxtun. The last confirmed return predates her entry into the shadow zone. The mid-course update is either not transmitted because the targeting system lacks confidence in the solution, or it is transmitted based on the stale data, which points to a position Truxtun occupied days earlier. The missile's guidance computer executes the trajectory without a valid current correction. The terminal seeker activates at approximately 15 to 20 nautical miles from the projected impact point. The seeker searches within its acquisition cone, the predicted zone of the target's position based on the firing solution. That cone has a search radius of roughly 5 nautical miles under normal conditions. Truxtun was 14 nautical miles outside the cone. The seeker activated, searched empty ocean, found no return, and the missile executed its terminal endgame protocol. Without acquisition, the Khorramshahr 4 defaults to the center of its search pattern, the last calculated target position, and detonates in the water, 14 nautical miles from where the ship was. The historical precedent that validates this was not improvisation. Operation Praying Mantis, April 18, 1988. The single largest American naval engagement since World War II. In 14 hours, United States surface forces and carrier aircraft disabled or sank nearly half of Iran's operational naval fleet. The frigates Sahand and Sabalan, 6 patrol boats, and 2 oil platform military installations repurposed as combat outposts. The tactical post-action assessments from Praying Mantis were extraordinarily detailed. Among the documented lessons, Iranian targeting doctrine in 1988 relied on last known position solutions rather than continuous tracking. American commanders who could create gaps in Iranian tracking had a measurable asymmetric advantage. That lesson was documented, analyzed, and fed into updated Persian Gulf operational planning for the decades that followed. The specific exploitation of terrain-generated radar shadows near the Hormuz entrance islands appears in the 1985 Doctrine Revision Cycle, written after the initial Praying Mantis planning studies, but before the operation itself, as part of a broader effort to model Iranian over-the-horizon radar vulnerabilities. We showed you in our video on the USS Ford's combat posture at Hormuz, how doctrine written in one era can redefine the outcome in another. This is the same principle. 38 years of institutional memory, maintained because someone in the Naval War College curriculum kept requiring officers to read old doctrine manuals. Subscribe to Navy Strikeforce. Because the equation Iran was running looked airtight from the outside, we just showed you why it had a zero built into it from the beginning. The full system picture now. Iran's theory of Persian Gulf naval dominance rests on 3 pillars. Understand the theory, and you understand why the shadow zone exploitation is more significant than a single tactical outcome. Pillar 1. Standoff range. The Khorramshahr 4 fires from 2,000 kilometers. Mobile launchers inside Iranian territory. Difficult to locate, target, and destroy before they fire. American destroyers in the Gulf cannot reach those launchers with shipborne weapons. They need carrier air wing support or land-based strike aircraft to threaten the mobile launcher force. Standoff range is a genuine advantage. Pillar 2. Terminal speed. Mach 5 in the terminal phase. Under 40 seconds from first radar detection to impact for a defending ship in most engagement geometries. The SM-6 has a demonstrated intercept probability against maneuvering hypersonic targets that Iran has studied carefully. Iranian war game models suggest that a salvo of 3 to 5 Khorramshahr 4 missiles creates a statistical problem that Aegis alone cannot reliably solve. Terminal speed and salvo architecture create genuine defensive complexity. Pillar 3. Guidance precision. The mid-course update combined with the active seeker head produces a circular error, probable of approximately 5 to 10 meters under normal conditions. Against a ship that cannot maneuver quickly enough to create meaningful offset, That is effectively a guaranteed hit on the ship's hull. Each pillar, independently, represents a genuine operational capability. The system, assembled, assumes that Ghadir provides continuous targeting data. Run the equation when Ghadir does not have a return. Pillar 1 is unaffected. The range is still 2,000 kilometers. The mobile launchers remain in Iranian territory. Pillar 2 is structurally compromised. The terminal phase is still Mach 5. But the geometry of the terminal approach, the acquisition cone of the seeker, the angular correction available at that velocity, is calculated from the targeting solution. If the targeting solution is based on a position 14 nautical miles from the ship's actual position, the terminal geometry is wrong before the seeker ever activates. Pillar 3 collapses entirely. Without the mid-course update, the circular error probable grows from roughly 10 meters to approximately 15 nautical miles. That is not a precision weapon. That is a statistical near-miss machine. The probability of kill for the Khorramshahr 4 as an integrated system is not the terminal accuracy of the seeker head in isolation. It is the product of every link in the kill chain multiplied together. The probability that Ghadir has a current return, multiplied by the probability that the mid-course update transmits successfully, multiplied by the probability that the updated trajectory places the seeker within acquisition range of the target, multiplied by the probability that the seeker acquires, multiplied by the probability that SM6 intercept fails. If you optimize only the last three factors, as the Khorramshahr 4 was optimized, and the first factor goes to 0, the entire product goes to 0. Iran's targeting chain is a series circuit. One open switch. Every light goes out. What this case reveals is a structural gap in how Iran's defense procurement and doctrine development communicate. The Khorramshahr 4 program represents a decade of aerospace engineering investment. Development costs probably in the range of $800 million to $1.2 billion. Hundreds of engineers, an entire domestic supply chain operating under sanctions constraints. The tactic that defeated its targeting architecture required one commanding officer, a working knowledge of ionospheric radar physics, a declassified terrain analysis, and a doctrine manual from 1985. The asymmetry is not just in the cost of the individual engagement. It is in the entire investment calculus on both sides. Iran competed by building a better weapon. The Navy competed by mapping every failure mode in the weapon's targeting chain before the weapon was ever fired in anger. The real failure here is not Iran's engineers. They built to specification. They built what they were asked to build, against the threat model they were given. The gap is institutional. Nobody in the IRGC Navy's doctrine development structure appears to have systematically wargamed what happens when an American destroyer knows the Ghadir shadow geometry and trains specifically to exploit it. That is not an intelligence failure. Iran's intelligence service knew American EMCON doctrine existed. That information is available in any naval warfare curriculum. The failure is the absence of a rigorous process for asking, what does our weapon look like when the enemy is specifically playing against it, not just operating normally? That gap between engineering the weapon and wargaming the adversary's countermoves is a more serious institutional problem than any individual missile limitation. Because you can upgrade a seeker head. You cannot upgrade a doctrine development process that never asks the hardest questions. That gap is more dangerous to Iran's naval strategy than anything the United States can deploy. Would you call the Khorramshahr 4 a failed weapon system? Comment yes or no below. There is a detail from the operational timeline that does not appear in the initial public analysis of this event, one that changes the strategic significance considerably. In the 11 days USS Truxtun operated under EMCON Charlie inside the Larak Island Shadow Zone, her AN/SLQ-32V 6 electronic warfare system was running in passive mode. No transmissions, pure collection. Every radar frequency the IRGC Navy surveillance ships were using every communications handoff between patrol boats, and shore-based command infrastructure. The timing and repetition cycles of Ghadir transmission patterns, when it transmits, at what frequency, with what dwell patterns. 11 days of signals intelligence. From inside the one portion of the strait where Iranian commanders believed they had no American surveillance presence. Truxtun was not just hiding, she was listening. The $2.1 million missile that flew to empty water did not only fail to strike a destroyer, it handed the United States Navy 11 days of targeting and emissions data on the exact radar network Iran uses to target American ships. The equation was running in both directions. Iran launched an expensive missile and got nothing. The Navy ran a $0 tactic and got 11 days of signals intelligence from an unmonitored corridor. That is a cost asymmetry that does not appear in any budget line. What comes next? Iran knows what happened. Iranian engineers are not slow. Iranian commanders are reviewing the operation and drawing the correct technical conclusions. The question is not whether they will attempt to fix the Ghadir Shadow Zone problem. They will. The question is how, and on what timeline. The fix is airborne targeting. Iran's Mohajer 10 long-range surveillance unmanned aerial vehicle is designed specifically for environments where ground-based radar has coverage gaps. It carries a synthetic aperture radar and an electro-optical sensor suite. In surveillance mode, it can loiter for more than 24 hours at operationally useful ranges. If Iran integrates Mohajer 10 as a forward targeting node for the Khorramshahr 4, flying it into shadow zones to provide mid-course guidance updates that Ghadir cannot, the Larak Island shadow becomes irrelevant. Iranian state media has reported Mohajer 10 production deliveries to the IRGC in recent months. The timeline for operational integration with the Khorramshahr 4 guidance architecture is not publicly known. CENTCOM knows this. The next move in this equation, whether it involves strike options against Mohajer 10 launch infrastructure before that integration becomes operational. New EMCON protocols exploiting the more complex terrain, shadow geometry near Keshem Island and Greater Tun to the west, or a decision to bring EA-18G Growler electronic attack aircraft into the Gulf to actively degrade Ghadir transmission cycles during Khorramshahr 4 engagements, is the classified portion of this problem that no open source analysis can fully reach. But the frame is visible. Will the Navy's Cold War doctrine keep pace with Iran's unmanned integration? Drop yes or no in the comments. We read everyone. The math points here. The Navy deployed a 2009 destroyer into a 2026 confrontation and ran a 1985 doctrine. A $2.1 million missile flew to empty water. The cost of the solution was zero. But $0 fixes have expiration dates. The equation changes when the variables change. Iran is changing its variables right now. The Mohajer 10 is in production. The IRGC is studying this engagement. The gap in their doctrine development process that allowed this outcome is being examined at a command level that will produce changes. The fundamental question, the one that defines Persian Gulf naval operations for the next decade, is not whether Iran can eventually field a targeting architecture that closes the Ghadir gap. They probably can. The question is whether the Navy continues to find and exploit the next series circuit failure mode in Iran's integrated targeting chain faster than Iran can close the ones it has already identified. So far, the answer has been yes. 11 days inside a volcanic island's radar shadow. 14 nautical miles of empty water. $2,100,000 against zero. The missile missed. The question worth asking is what made it miss. Subscribe to Navy Strikeforce. Because the next equation, the one Iran is already building the answer to, requires the same rigor to understand. The machine matters less than the math behind it.